All right, so first we're gonna chop up the steak. For this hibachi steak, we're going to actually reuse the fat, and we're gonna render it first so we can use it to help cook the steak and the vegetables. Now, this is not generally considered ghee. Ghee is slightly more purified if you want to oversimplify it. This is basically the tallow. What we're going to attempt to do here, if I could do a better job of actually separating the fat and not losing the meat in the process, is use this to enrich the flavor of the noodles and also the vegetables. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to slice the steak into nice half-inch, quarter-inch slices, and that'll make it easy to sear up in our pan when we get there. London broil. So it's not really traditional steak used for hibachi, but I've found since I was a kid, you can pretty much substitute London broil with anything, and if you cook it the right way, you can't really tell the difference. So we're going to go a little bit oblong here so that I don't have to fight with the vein of fat. Chop this up. Coincidentally, this is a very old, and I don't remember the last time it was sharpened knife. And once we're done with this, we'll start searing up the fat. That'll give us essentially our working oil. You want to heat up the pan before you actually do anything with it. In this case, I'm going to set it to medium high-ish, and we're going to let it warm up for a couple minutes and then test it with a couple drops of water. If you don't do this with stainless steel, it can grip the food, which will cause things to stick and potentially even cook unevenly. The moisture, except for the metal, it's simply becoming more active as you're heating it up. So I'm going to cut to when it's actually heated up, and then we will start rendering some fat. While we're on the topic of pans, this other conveniently placed Pampered Chef pan is going to be heating up our fettuccine noodles, which we are using as a substitute for hibachi noodles, simply because it's a cheaper alternative. I spent $2 from my box of store brand fettuccine, and the real trick is going to be cooking it slightly less than what's on the box and then frying it up in the pan in the tallow once we finish with everything else to add in that beef flavor. Our pan is about ready, so we're going to take our fat along with a little bit of meat that I couldn't quite get off. And we're just going to play with that in the skillet a little bit till we start seeing the liquid fat come off of it. Now this is one of those kind of difficult parts because I can't get all the meat off. I technically have to let that sear a little bit. So there's going to be leftover bits in addition to the fat once we're all done. I'll turn the temperature down just a little bit. That we'll have to fight with. But by and large, it should produce a more natural, beefy flavor by the time we're finished with everything else than simply throwing like some butter or some oil in here. Now, all that said, we do see some fat. If you look around, you can see it rendering all throughout the pan here. So once I kind of finish chopping this up, I'm going to turn the heat down and then let it render out some more. Then we'll pull out the bits because we don't really need the bits that are left once this is all done. We really just need the fat in the pan and then cut over to the next step in this process. While that fat is finishing rendering up, I'm going to show you a dad hack that I probably also would get yelled at, but it's my video, so I do what I want. So, this fettuccine, too long to fit in pan. This also is an Italian dish, so breaking the noodles is not considered. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut the noodles using the box to keep them all together, minimize the amount of craziness that will happen as a result. I did wash these scissors before I started. I didn't just go straight from cutting fat to here, just so you know. And then now that we've cut the box, I'm gonna, over the pan, finish. There we go. And now they all fit. I'm going to add a bit of oil. In this case, avocado oil. Helps keep the noodles from sticking together. Once this gets to a boil, which it should be doing very shortly, we will let it cook for about half the amount of time, 2/3 the amount of time. We'll see how the noodles are. And then we'll stop, we'll drain, and we'll rinse to get the starch off, and then add some more oil to keep it from getting gunked together. And then we'll fry them up after we finish everything else. All right, we have pretty much rendered out all the fat that we're gonna get. What's left at the top are various bits of meat from what I couldn't easily carve out or were otherwise in the fat. Some recipes will let you leave those in. Some people don't like it. Some people do like it. It's like bacon bits. So we're going to leave them to the side because they'll still be adding flavor as we get to the vegetables. But we're about ready to throw in some steak. We've brought the heat up to high heat. As you can see, it's smoking. So we can sear the meat, lock in some flavor. I'm going to do 2 batches of this. I'm going to mix these up. Try and spread them around a little bit, get the advantage of all the fat. And the nice thing about rendering the fat first is the pan has had plenty of time to evenly heat up. So as we're searing this, we'll see a nice even sear on all sides. And then we'll let this sit for a minute and then flip them over and then pull them out and put the next batch in. All right, our first batch is pretty much seared. Our noodles are almost ready to drain and strain. So we're gonna pull out seared meat. Now, what I'm gonna do, which this is a matter of opinion, I happen to be related to somebody who prefers their meat to be completely charcoalified. So I'm actually just focusing on getting the meat seared right now and getting the rest of them all to that point. I will be throwing all these back in together with the vegetables at the very end because we'll serve from the pan too once we pull out the bits. But I generally like a medium rare steak. If you like a medium rare steak, then just pull this out a little bit sooner than I am. If you want it turned into the consistency of dirt, then feel free to let it cook even longer until it looks like dirt. That's how you know it's cooked. That's actually the last thing after well done is dirt flavored. All right, pardon the sink. It's not completely empty because we have 3 kids and they can only do so much. But we're gonna drain this. And obviously there's a few noodles that even with the oil didn't actually stay off, but by and large, pretty much oil did its job. Also might be cooking this a little bit too aggressively for the noodles' liking, but that's okay. I cooked it a little bit slower, be less of a deal breaker. We'll just leave those there for now. But what we will do, we'll add some oil to the pan right away because we're going to eventually put these back in, and that'll help keep the noodles from sticking together. This effectively pauses the cooking process so we can finish it in the skillet and have fried noodles. And then I'm going to throw a few in here. Actually, we'll just throw them all in here. That'll be fine. And we'll throw some more oil in it and mix it together. And then come back and finish up the steak. So for what's left of the steak, I'm going to use these conveniently placed Pampered Chef tongs. They make it a lot easier to flip things in the skillet, obviously, than just using the silicone spatula. The advantage of the spatula is you can just mix and nothing really sticks to it. It has silicone. The advantage of tongs, obviously you grab things. So you probably want to have one of each. We'll give this another 60 seconds. We'll pull the meat out and then we'll get to our vegetables. All right, these are pretty much set. And pull those out. We're going to lose some fat in the migration. I also moved some fat from, or some juice back from the first batch into the pan so that we have it for the next step, which will be our vegetables. We're just going to mix this around a little bit. Everything together here. And then we'll grab our biggest sheet of the evening. So I do like vegetables. I don't like spending a half hour cutting vegetables. This dish would traditionally call for cabbage, broccoli, carrots, onions, you name it. Now, I am noticing that perhaps we want to add a little bit of oil after all for the sake of the vegetables. So we are going to go back on my word. Next time I'll pick a fattier piece of meat and just add a little bit of oil to help everything that Pampered Chef has to cut those things up, which they do. However, this was $2. It looks fresh, and it only took me 10 seconds. So from a timing standpoint, I think this is a better choice. Now, as we mix our, I don't even know what the technical term for these would be, our remaining parts of the rendered parts of beef, which should theoretically just be beef at this point because all the fat's been rendered out. We're going to brown this up a little bit. We're not going to overdo this though. We're going to transfer most of this once we're done to something else so it still remains a little bit crunchy, as we don't want mushy vegetables. This just adds to the overall palate of the steak when you bite into it. With a couple bites of this mixed in, gives it that fresh flavor from the garden. The other thing I'll note, for if you haven't noticed it yet, I haven't actually thrown any seasonings or anything in this, which is actually the natural way to do this. You don't season, you let the quality of the meat itself and the cooking process speak for the flavor, which is why we're using the fat from the beef to prepare everything and mix everything together. So by and large, should come out pretty tasty and also pretty easy on the stomach. The rest of this should be pretty easy though, so just skip the cabbage and refer to one of the numerous demos my wife has done on how to use Pampered Chef tools to chop and slice and mince broccoli and carrots and zucchini. And I was like, that doesn't really feel like hibachi to me. Let me find a more close to the original recipe and then work with that. And then here we are. So I'm going to finish mixing this up, transfer it out, and then get to work on the noodles. So I'll be right back. And remember how I said we weren't going to add any spices? I guess technically if you want to consider garlic to be a spice, technically we're adding some garlic. We're going to take a few pieces of this and just throw it in. We'll fight with it in a minute. And then I'm going to throw some homemade butter in to help with the noodles, which we made a little bit ago. So it's mostly full. Most of the liquid has been pulled out. As you can see, it's very powdery. That'll help us get this noodle frying process started. So we'll let this kind of simmer a little bit. The good thing about adding this into at the end, you see this dark stuff, you're like, oh, I'm going to have to clean that off the pan. Not if you get it off now, because that's the flavor we're going to put into the noodles, because it's basically just beef tallow. So we'll get a nice beefy flavor in the noodles too. This is very cow-centric type of dish. So I'm going to finish letting this ruminate, and then I'll be back when I'm ready to throw some noodles in. All right, now I think we're ready to throw some noodles in. We will be using those same handy-dandy tongs, grabbing a chunk and just spreading them around, making sure we get some butter on everything. And we will probably be adding butter as we go, just to make sure everything gets a good coating. Mix everything together, get that flavor all on those noodles. The minced garlic, which is browned and mixed in at this point. And there's your tell that we need more butter because there's none left floating in the pan. Lucky for me, I've Got probably an extra 1/4 pound of butter here just to work with. So by and large, I'm just trying to get as much of the flavor out of the pan and into the noodles as possible. And then we'll turn the heat up. We'll sear the noodles. And then we'll basically be done. I'll cut back once I'm ready to start searing the noodles up. All right, now we're gonna crank the heat up. Start our final mix together. So I'm gonna pull out some of the noodles and just put them to the side just because there's a lot and there's not that much surface area. So I'm gonna use the pan. I'm also not using the whole box of noodles, just as an FYI. I also didn't use the whole package of slaw, the cabbage, the carrots, and the broccoli, just because that's a lot to fit into one skillet. So you might find it better to make a couple batches, something to that effect. Make the noodles around just so that you can play and make sure they don't get stuck to the bottom of the pan. You do want that golden feel as you see here, but you also don't want them to get stuck. In the interest of not ruining the noodles, I will come back once I've finished searing them, but it's the same behavior. You can see them getting golden brown. You just keep doing it till you finish them all. All right, so we've turned the heat down. We've pulled most of the noodles out. We're now going to, we combine everything together, add all of this back in, roll everything together. Got a few noodles at the bottom that are gonna stick, that's okay. We've got our steak. We'll reheat now that it's rested for a good chunk of time. We'll throw on top our noodles. So we'll just throw the whole pan in. There we go. And then lastly, we'll throw the veggies on top. Now that we're basically at the end of this, and we'll mix it all together. The beef is finishing underneath. Everything's nice and hot and mixed together. And then the final result, obviously, will be dinner. So, thank you guys for watching. If you found this at least entertaining, if not informative, give a like and subscribe. Thank you. See you guys later.